The words hung in the stale, recycled air of the jet bridge, colder than any frost. I'm not flying with her on my aircraft. The pilot, a man with silver hair and a uniform that screamed authority, pointed a rigid finger. His target wasn't a threat. It was a 17-year-old girl with a laptop bag and a ticket to her future. Her name was Amara Washington. The pilot didn't know her name, her story, or the dormant power she held at her fingertips. He only saw her skin. In that moment, he made the biggest mistake of his career. He didn't just deny a passenger. He lit the fuse on a bomb that would bring his entire world crashing down. The fluorescent lights of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 hummed with a familiar, anxious energy. For 17-year-old Amara Washington, that hum was a symphony of possibility. Clutched in her hand was a boarding pass for a Send Air Flight 714 to San Francisco. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a golden ticket, the culmination of 4 years of sleepless nights, caffeine-fueled coding sessions, and a relentless belief in her own abilities. Amara was a prodigy, a whisper in the competitive coding circuits that was about to become a roar. She had won the East Coast Regional Qualifier for InnovateSphere, the nation's most prestigious technology summit for young minds. In San Francisco, she would present her proprietary data compression algorithm, an elegant, beautiful piece of code that could revolutionize data storage. She wasn't just going to compete, she was a favorite to win the coveted $20,000 scholarship, and more importantly, an internship with a titan of Silicon Valley. Her foster mother, Elena, had used her entire savings to buy the ticket. "You go make us proud," she had said, her voice thick with emotion as she hugged Amara at the security checkpoint. "Show them what you're made of." The words echoed in Amara's mind, a protective mantra against the gnawing insecurity that often shadowed her brilliance. Dressed in a simple grey hoodie jeans and well-worn sneakers, Amara didn't look like a revolutionary programmer. Her backpack was heavy with her life's work, a state-of-the-art laptop covered in stickers for Python Linux and the Electronic Frontier Foundation. She looked like any other teenager, maybe a little tired, but her eyes, a deep, thoughtful brown, held a fire that could solve the world's most complex problems. As she navigated the crowded gate area, she noticed the flight crew assembling near the podium. Among them was the pilot, a man who carried himself with the unshakable certainty of someone who had spent 30 years in command. Captain Robert Henderson was a picture of aviation authority. His jaw was square, his silver hair was impeccably combed, and the 4 stripes on his epaulets seemed to press down with the weight of his experience. He was a pilot's pilot, a man who believed in rules, order, and his own gut instinct above all else. His gut, however, was curdled by decades of unspoken biases, a quiet contempt for a world that was changing in ways he didn't approve of. Amara found a seat and pulled out her phone, sending a quick text to Elena boarding soon. "Love you." She idly connected to the airport's public Wi-Fi, then decided to check the Ascend Air passenger portal. Just for fun, she ran a quick, harmless diagnostic on the app's login page. Her fingers danced across the screen of her phone, testing its architecture. She smirked. The security was sloppy. It was like finding a designer handbag held together with tape and glue functional on the surface, but a mess underneath. A simple SQL injection could probably pull up passenger manifests. A more sophisticated attack could access far more. She logged out, shaking her head at the corporate negligence. It was a fleeting observation, an academic curiosity she dismissed as quickly as it came. "We are now inviting passengers in boarding group C to approach the gate." The agent's voice crackled over the PA system. That was her. Amara slung her backpack over her shoulder, the weight of familiar comfort. She felt a thrill of anticipation. This was it. The final step before her journey began. She joined the line, her boarding pass extended, and waited her turn. When she reached the gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Sarah Jenkins. She offered a small, polite smile. Sarah scanned the ticket. "Have a great flight, dear." Amara smiled back. "Thank you. I will." She walked down the jet bridge, the muffled sounds of the airport giving way to the metallic echo of the tunnel. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant offered a practiced, welcoming smile. Amara stepped inside the cabin of the Boeing 737-800, found her seat, 12A, a window seat just over the wing, and began the familiar ritual of settling in. She slid her backpack under the seat in front of her, carefully positioning it to protect her laptop. The future was in that bag. She gazed out the window, watching the ground crew buzzing around the aircraft like worker bees. The sheer power of the machine, the miracle of flight, never failed to awe her. It was applied science, a testament to what humanity could achieve. It was a world she belonged in. A few minutes later, the last of the passengers had boarded. The flight attendant was preparing to close the main cabin door when Captain Henderson emerged from the cockpit. He walked a few paces down the aisle, his eyes scanning the passengers. It was a routine check, something pilots often did. But his gaze wasn't routine. It was sharp, accusatory, and it stopped with an unnerving intensity directly on Amara. He stared for a moment, his expression hardening. Amara felt a prickle of unease. Had she done something wrong? Was her bag not stowed correctly? She looked down, then back up at him. He hadn't moved. He turned and strode back to the front, leaning down to speak to the gate agent Sarah, who was standing at the threshold. His voice was a low, angry murmur, too quiet to be understood, but his body language was unmistakable. He gestured back into the cabin, a sharp, dismissive flick of his hand in Amara's direction. The lead flight attendant looked confused. Sarah, the gate agent, looked horrified. Amara's heart began to beat a little faster. This wasn't right. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. The symphony of possibility she had heard in the terminal was souring into a discordant, threatening clang. Sarah Jenkins stepped fully onto the aircraft, her face pale. She followed Captain Henderson's gaze back to seat 12A. "Captain," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "What's the problem?" "The problem," Henderson said, his voice now rising to a level that cut through the cabin's low chatter, "is that I have a security concern. I am the pilot in command of this aircraft, and my word is law. I am not comfortable with that passenger." He didn't point this time, but his eyes were locked on Amara. Heads began to turn. The passengers in the surrounding rows fell silent, their conversations dying on their lips. Amara felt dozens of eyes on her, a wave of hot, suffocating attention. She shrank into her seat, her mind racing. Security concern. What is he talking about, Sarah? The gate agent was caught in an impossible position. She was a 20-year veteran of the airline industry and had seen it all, but this was different. This was raw, undisguised prejudice. "Captain, she's a 17-year-old girl. She's been through TSA screening like everyone else. What possible concern could there be?" "My concern is that I don't like her demeanor," Henderson retorted, his voice dripping with condescension. "She's been shifty-eyed since she got on. I have a gut feeling, and my gut has kept my plane safe for 30 years. I want her off this flight. Now." The term, shifty-eyed, hung in the air, a thinly veiled slur that everyone understood. A man in the row in front of Amara, a businessman in a crisp suit, turned around. "This is ridiculous," he said. "The girl hasn't done a thing." A woman across the aisle nodded in agreement. "He can't just do that, can he?" But Henderson was an immovable object. "This is not a democracy." He boomed, asserting his authority over the nascent rebellion. It's my plane. Federal aviation regulations give me final say on who flies and who doesn't for the safety of the flight. She is a safety risk. Get her off." Amara finally found her voice small and shaky. I haven't done anything wrong. I have a ticket." Henderson didn't even look at her. He addressed Sarah as if Amara were a piece of luggage. "Remove her, or I'm not clearing this plane for takeoff. We'll sit here all day." Sarah looked at Amara, her eyes pleading. "Ma'am, I am so sorry," she whispered. "But he's the captain. I have to ask you to come with me." The humiliation was a physical blow. It felt like the air had been punched from her lungs. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and stinging, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of him. She had been stereotyped and dismissed her whole life, but never like this. Never so publicly, so cruelly. This man with his 4 stripes and unearned arrogance had judged and convicted her in the span of 30 seconds, based on nothing more than his own bigotry. He was stripping her of her dignity, her opportunity, her future. Slowly, mechanically, she reached under the seat and pulled out her backpack. The weight of it now felt like a ton of bricks. Each sticker on her laptop seemed to mock her. Python, Linux, InnovateSphere. They were symbols of a world she thought she belonged to, a meritocracy where skill was the only thing that mattered. Captain Henderson had just reminded her that for some people that was a naive fantasy. As she stood and shuffled into the aisle, a deep, profound silence fell over the cabin. No one met her eyes. The businessman who had spoken up now stared intently at the seatback in front of him. The woman across the aisle fiddled with her magazine. Their fleeting support had evaporated in the face of true authority. Amara was alone. She walked the length of the aisle, her head held as high as she could manage, her cheeks burning. She could feel Henderson's triumphant gaze on her back every step of the way. She didn't look at him. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. As she stepped off the plane and back onto the jet bridge, the flight attendant closed the door behind her with a soft, final click. It was the sound of her dream dying. Sarah Jenkins was waiting for her, her face a mask of professional regret and personal shame. "I am so sorry," Sarah said, her voice cracking. "There was nothing I could do. We'll get you booked on the next flight out tomorrow morning. We'll provide a hotel voucher." Amara just stared at the now sealed aircraft door. Tomorrow would be too late. The keynote presentation at InnovateSphere was that evening. The main competition judging was the next morning. By the time she arrived, it would all be over. He hadn't just removed her from a flight. He had stolen her future. "It's not your fault," Amara said, her voice hollow. She looked at Sarah, the first tear finally tracing a path down her cheek. "But he's not going to get away with this." Sarah gave a sad, knowing smile. Honey guys like him always do. The jet engine began to whine, its pitch rising, as the plane prepared to push back from the gate. The sound was a physical pain, the roar of her stolen opportunity flying away without her. And in that moment, sitting alone in the desolate gate area, as Flight 716 began its journey to the runway, the hurt and humiliation inside Amara Washington began to curdle to harden. It transmuted from despair into something else entirely, something cold, sharp, and dangerously focused. The world outside the terminal window was a blur of motion. Planes took off, landed, and taxied in a complex, unending ballet. But for Amara, everything had stopped. She sat on a hard plastic chair, the useless hotel voucher clutched in her hand. Sarah had rebooked her for a 6 a.m. flight, a gesture of kindness that was utterly meaningless. The conference, the scholarship, the internship, all of it was dust. For an hour, she did nothing. She let the waves of grief, anger, and helplessness wash over her. She thought of Elena's savings. She thought of the condescending smirk she imagined was on Captain Henderson's face as he climbed to 30,000 feet. She thought of the silence of the other passengers, the averted eyes, the complicity. The system had failed her. A complaint form would be filed and forgotten. Henderson would get a slap on the wrist if that. The world would keep spinning, and her injustice would be a forgotten footnote. Guys like him always do, Sarah had said. A fire ignited in the pit of her stomach. It was an old, familiar fire, one that had fueled her through countless nights of study, one that had driven her to prove wrong every teacher who underestimated her, every peer who dismissed her. It was the fire of defiance. She pulled her laptop from her backpack. The power light blinked a steady rhythmic pulse like a patient heart. She wasn't just some girl in a hoodie. She wasn't a security threat. She was an architect of digital worlds. She understood the hidden language of systems, the invisible scaffolding that held modern life together. And she remembered the Ascend Air passenger portal, the shoddy, insecure mess she had glanced at earlier. It was a reckless thought, a dangerous one. This wasn't a school network or a coding challenge. This was federal airspace critical infrastructure. The consequences could be catastrophic. Jail time, a criminal record that would destroy any chance of a future in tech. But what future did she have now? The one she had meticulously built had been torched by one man's prejudice. He used the system's rules to break her. What if she used the system's flaws to break him? Her fingers flew across the keyboard. The terminal window opened a black screen with a blinking green cursor. It was her sanctuary, her canvas. She connected to the airport Wi-Fi again, but this time she wasn't a passive user. She masked her IP address, routing her connection through a series of encrypted proxy servers from Estonia to Singapore, a digital ghost. First, she went back to the passenger portal. The SQL injection was child's play. In less than 5 minutes, she had bypassed the login and was staring at the raw database. Passenger manifests, flight schedules, employee IDs. It was all there, a treasure trove of poorly secured data. She could have stolen identities, credit card numbers. But that wasn't the goal. Revenge was a dish best served cold and with devastating precision. She searched the employee database for Captain Robert Henderson. His file appeared on her screen. 32 years of service. A clean record on paper. A list of commendations. But there was also a small sealed section for internal complaints. She didn't have the clearance to open it, but she didn't need to. She wrote a simple script to bypass the permissions. The files opened. There it was. 3 complaints in the last 5 years. A flight attendant of Middle Eastern descent who accused him of hostile and discriminatory language. A Sikh co-pilot who filed a grievance for being repeatedly passed over for leg captain duties. A black baggage handler who claimed Henderson had used a racial slur after his golf clubs were slow to be unloaded. All 3 complaints had been investigated by HR and dismissed as unsubstantiated or a result of workplace friction. The airline knew. Ascend Air knew who Robert Henderson was, and they had protected him. They were complicit. The target was no longer just the pilot. It was the entire airline. Her focus shifted. Stealing data was petty. Disrupting a single flight was trivial. She wanted to do something they couldn't ignore, something that would make them feel as powerless as she had felt. She began to hunt for the heart of their operations. Through the employee portal, she found a link to the crew rostering and flight logistics software. It was a proprietary system, clunky and outdated, probably designed in the late 90s, and patched together ever since. It was a digital Frankenstein's monster, and Amara knew just where to find the stitches. She found a 0-day vulnerability, an unpatched security hole in the system's legacy code that no one else had ever discovered. It was a back door, a key to the entire kingdom. The fire in her stomach was now a raging inferno. The despair was gone, replaced by an electrifying, terrifying sense of purpose. They had taken her seat. She was about to take their entire sky. With a final deep breath, she began to write the code. It was elegant, efficient, and utterly devastating. A logic bomb, timed to perfection. She wouldn't just delete data. That was amateurish. She would corrupt it. She would reassign every pilot and flight attendant to the wrong flights. She would send maintenance crews to the wrong gates. She would scramble flight numbers and change destinations in the system. She would turn their meticulously planned national network into a tangled, incomprehensible knot of chaos. She set the trigger, a simple command waiting for her to press enter. Her finger hovered over the key. This was the point of no return. A single keystroke separated the victim from the vigilante. She thought of Henderson's sneer, the closed cabin door, the dream turning to ash. She pressed enter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then deep in the corporate servers of Ascend Air, in a climate-controlled room, hundreds of miles away, her code began to replicate. Like a virus, it spread from the crew scheduling system to the flight dispatch system, to the gate assignment network, and even to the baggage handling logistics. Amara Washington closed her laptop. She stood up, her body buzzing with adrenaline. She dropped the hotel voucher in a nearby trash can. She didn't need it anymore. She walked out of the terminal and into the cool night air, melting into the anonymity of the city. She had no idea of the scale of the tempest she had just unleashed. The first sign of trouble appeared at 9:47 p.m. Eastern Time in the Ascend Air Operations Control Center, OCC, in Dallas, Texas. A senior flight dispatcher, a man named Gary, frowned at his screen. Flight 308 from Chicago to Denver had suddenly in the system been rerouted to Miami. Its assigned crew, who were physically in Chicago, were now listed as being on standby in Atlanta. System glitch, Gary muttered, trying to manually correct the error. But as he typed, the data warped again. The Denver flight was now heading to Seattle, and its assigned pilot was a captain who had retired 6 months ago. Alarms, soft at first, began to chime across the room as other dispatchers noticed similar impossibilities on their own screens. Within 10 minutes, the soft chimes had escalated into a cacophony of shrieking alerts. The massive digital board that displayed Ascender's entire national flight network flickered and went haywire. Green lines representing active flights turned red, then vanished. Flight numbers and destinations began to cycle randomly, like a broken slot machine. Panic began to set in. "What is going on?" the shift supervisor shouted. "Ait, get me a T on the line now." The problem was cascading. At airports across the country, Ascend Air's systems began to fail. Gate agents tried to print boarding passes only to have them come out with gibberish. Departure and arrival boards flashed with nonsensical information. Flight 112 to Honolulu, now departing from Gate C4 for Baghdad. Baggage handlers received instructions to load luggage for a flight to Orlando onto a plane that was, according to their system, going to Anchorage. The pilots in the air were safe. Their onboard navigation systems were separate and secure. But the ground was dissolving into absolute chaos. No one knew which crew was supposed to fly which plane. No one knew which gate any plane was supposed to go to. Maintenance logs were scrambled, making it impossible to verify which aircraft were cleared for service. Ascend Air was blind. The airline's logistical nervous system had been severed at the spinal cord. At 10:15 p.m., with dozens of planes full of passengers sitting on tarmacs, unable to take off, and dozens more circling their destinations with no gate to go to the call was made. Michael Vance, the slick, silver-haired CEO of Ascend Air, was pulled out of a charity dinner. Standing in a quiet corridor, the sounds of a string quartet filtering through the door, he listened with growing horror as his COO explained the situation. "Shut it down," Vance said, his voice cold and steady. "Shut it all down. Issue a nationwide ground stop for every Ascend Air flight. I don't care what it costs. Land the planes that are in the air at the nearest possible airport. And get our cybersecurity team online. I want to know who did this. I want to know what they want. Is it a ransomware attack?" But that was the terrifying part. There was no ransom note, no hacker group claiming responsibility, just pure, unadulterated chaos. By midnight, the news was breaking. CNN, Fox, News, BBC. Every major outlet was leading with the story. Ascend Air grounds entire fleet amid unprecedented system-wide failure. The stock in after-hours trading began to plummet. The financial cost was astronomical. Every hour the fleet was grounded. The airline was losing millions in fuel crew salaries, airport fees, and lost ticket sales. Meanwhile, in a San Francisco hotel room, Captain Robert Henderson was pouring himself a celebratory scotch. Flight 714 had landed on time, a perfectly routine flight. He had already forgotten the girl from the morning. She was a non-entity, a minor annoyance he had dealt with efficiently as he always did. He turned on the TV to catch the late news and saw the blazing red banner at the bottom of the screen. He watched his glass frozen halfway to his lips as the anchor detailed the pandemonium. His airline was in free fall. He felt a smug sense of detachment. It was some IT nerd's fault, no doubt. Some sloppy programmer in Dallas. It had nothing to do with him. He was a pilot. He flew the planes. He was above all this. He took a long sip of his scotch, the picture of blissful ignorance. Back in New York, Amara was in a cheap motel room near the airport paid for with the last of her cash. She had her laptop open, but she wasn't hacking anymore. She was watching. Using her skills, she had tunneled into Ascend Air's internal communications network, a silent observer in their panic room. She listened to the frantic conference calls, watched the desperate emails fly back and forth. She saw them discover the corrupted data. She heard the lead cybersecurity analyst say, his voice strained with disbelief, "This isn't random. It's elegant. It's like someone took a scalpel to our entire logistics network. They didn't smash it. They rewired it into a nightmare." A thrill terrifying and exhilarating shot through her. She hadn't just smashed something. She had created something perfect, beautiful chaos. She had made the invisible system visible by breaking it. She had made them feel as powerless and stranded as she was. The scale of it was bigger than she had imagined. She hadn't considered the thousands of other passengers, the families trying to get to weddings, the business people missing meetings, the people rushing to a sick relative's bedside. A pang of guilt hit her sharp and unexpected, but she pushed it away. The system that allowed a man like Henderson to wield his power so carelessly was the same system that was now stranding these people. This wasn't her fault. It was his. The next morning, the FBI was called in. A cyber attack on a national airline was a matter of national security. A team from the Bureau's cyber division was dispatched to the Ascend Air headquarters in Dallas. The hunt for the ghost in the machine had begun. Amara knew they would come looking. She had been careful routing her IP through multiple countries, but she was not an international cybercriminal. She was a 17-year-old girl, and even the most brilliant minds can make mistakes. Or sometimes they can leave a breadcrumb on purpose, a signature, a reason. She had to make sure they knew why this had happened. It couldn't be a random act of cyber-terrorism. It had to lead back to him. Before she had launched the attack, she had embedded one tiny anomalous piece of data into the heart of the corrupted code. It was a single line, commented out so it wouldn't be executed, a message hidden in plain sight for anyone who knew how to look. A digital calling card waiting to be found. For 48 agonizing hours, Ascend Air ceased to exist as a functional airline. Its planes sat dormant on tarmacs across the nation like giant, useless metal birds. Its ticket counters were besieged by furious passengers. Its stock price had fallen by 30%, wiping out nearly $1 billion in market value. CEO Michael Vance was living on coffee and antacids, locked in a war room with FBI agents and his own shell-shocked executive team. The lead investigator from the FBI was Special Agent David Chen. He was a quiet, methodical man in his late 40s who had spent his career hunting the world's most elusive cybercriminals. He wasn't like the agents in the movies. He didn't kick down doors. He sifted through trillions of lines of code, looking for the one misplaced semicolon, the one digital fingerprint that would betray the culprit. "They're a ghost," Ascend's head of IT said, throwing his hands up in frustration. "The IP address bounces from a server in Tallinn to a node in Brazil. It's a professional job, probably a state-sponsored group or a major ransomware syndicate." Agent Chen didn't reply. He just kept staring at the corrupted code that his team had painstakingly isolated. Something felt off. He'd seen the work of Russian and Chinese state hackers. He'd seen the blunt force trauma of ransomware gangs. This was different. It wasn't about money or espionage. There was no ransom demand. No stolen data had appeared on the dark web. This was personal. The attack wasn't designed to steal or destroy, but to humiliate, to paralyze. It had a strange, almost artistic quality to its malice. "Let's go back to the source," Chen said quietly. "The initial intrusion point, the passenger Wi-Fi portal." They traced the ghost's path. They saw the initial SQL injection, a simple, almost textbook entry. "That's odd," Chen's junior analyst noted. "For a hacker, this sophisticated, the entry point is almost lazy. Like they just walked up and saw the front door was unlocked. Or they didn't have a lot of time," Chen mused. "They weren't casing the joint for weeks. This was an impulse, an attack of opportunity. This changed everything. It wasn't a state-sponsored group. It was someone who had been physically present, someone who had access to Ascend's Wi-Fi network. Right before the attack, they narrowed the time frame for the initial intrusion to a 6-hour window on the day the chaos began. They cross-referenced it with the location JFK's Terminal 4. "So we're looking for a passenger," Chen stated. "Or an employee. Someone at JFK who had a massive grudge and the skills of a world-class hacker." The net was still impossibly wide. Thousands of people had passed through that terminal. It was on the third day that Chen's analyst found it. Buried deep within the logic bomb's central script, hidden among thousands of lines of malicious code, was a single inactive line. In most programming languages, a double slash turns a line of code into a simple comment, a note for humans that the computer ignores. The line read, "For flight 714, for Amara." The room went silent. "What is flight 74? Agent Chen asked, his voice barely a whisper. A frantic search began. "Flight 714, JFK to SFO, departed on the day of the attack." An operations manager pulled up the flight report. It was a completely unremarkable flight. On time. No mechanical issues. No security incidents logged. "Wait a minute," the manager said, scrolling down to the gate agent's logs. "There's an addendum here. A passenger was removed prior to departure, at the captain's request." On what grounds? Chen asked. Captain's discretion. Cites uneasy feeling security concern. Get me the passenger's name, Chen commanded. The manager typed. Washington. Amara Washington. Age 17. The pieces clicked into place with an audible snap. Michael Vance, the CEO who had been listening in, felt a cold dread creep up his spine. He remembered the name. He'd seen a preliminary report about the incident, an internal complaint filed by the gate agent Sarah Jenkins, who had been deeply disturbed by the captain's actions. Vance had dismissed it as a minor customer service issue to be handled by HR later. Now that minor issue was costing them tens of millions of dollars a day. Who was the captain on that flight? Vance asked, his voice dangerously low. Henderson. Robert Henderson. Vance closed his eyes. He knew Henderson's file. He knew about the prior complaints, the ones his HR department had conveniently buried to protect a senior pilot and avoid union disputes. In their attempt to manage a small problem, they had incubated a billion-dollar catastrophe. Get Henderson on a plane back here. Now, Vance ordered. And someone find out everything there is to know about Amara Washington. The search wasn't difficult. She wasn't a ghost. She was a 17-year-old honor student, a foster kid from the Bronx, who had earned a golden ticket to a tech conference. A prodigy. A kid whose future they had crushed at the gate of Flight 714. The motive was no longer a mystery. The billion-dollar question of why had been answered. A 17-year-old girl denied her seat because a pilot didn't like the color of her skin had retaliated by grounding his entire airline. The story was too perfect, too damning. If this got out, Ascend Air wouldn't just be a case study in cybersecurity failure. It would become the poster child for corporate racism and systemic injustice. This was a public relations nightmare from which they might never recover. Agent Chen, Vance said, his face ashen. We need to handle this with extreme delicacy. We need to find her before the media does. Captain Robert Henderson arrived at the Dallas headquarters feeling indignant and inconvenienced. He had been recalled from his layover, ordered onto a rival airline's flight, a deep insult in itself, and escorted from the airport to the corporate office like a person of interest. He walked into the executive boardroom with his customary swagger, expecting an apology for the disruption. Instead, he found Michael Vance, two grim-faced lawyers, and FBI agent David Chen waiting for him. The mood in the room was glacial. "Bob, sit down," Vance said, his voice devoid of its usual corporate warmth. Henderson sat a flicker of unease, finally penetrating his armor of self-importance. "Mike, what the hell is going on? I hear the network's down. It's a disaster." "The disaster Bob started on your plane," Vance said, sliding a printed file across the polished mahogany table. "Flight 742, tell me about the passenger you removed." Henderson scoffed. "Oh, for God's sake, the girl. This is what this is about." I had a gut feeling. She looked out of place, nervous. My job is to ensure the safety of my flight, and I made a command decision. What exactly was it about a 17-year-old honor student on her way to a tech competition that made you feel unsafe? One of the lawyers asked, his tone sharp. It was her attitude, her demeanor. Henderson blustered, falling back on his vague, unprovable assertions. You can't quantify these things. It's about experience. Agent Chen spoke for the first time, his voice calm and dissecting. "Captain Henderson, are you aware that the cyber attack that has grounded this airline and initiated a federal investigation was launched minutes after you removed Miss Washington from your flight?" Henderson's face went blank. "What, that's impossible. What does that have to do with anything?" Chen leaned forward. "We have reason to believe the attack was a direct retaliation for your actions. The hacker left a signature. It said, For Flight 714, for O'Mara. The captain's bravado finally cracked. He stared at Chen, then at Vance, his mind struggling to connect the dots. The girl in the hoodie, the quiet one with the backpack. He had dismissed her as insignificant. The idea that she could possess the power to bring a multi-billion-dollar corporation to its knees was so far outside his worldview that he couldn't process it. It was like being told a fly had swatted down a battleship. That's insane, he stammered. She's just a kid. She is a kid you publicly humiliated, and whose future you may have single-handedly destroyed. Vance cut in his voice, laced with fury. And in return, she has dismantled our company from the inside out. Your gut feeling is going to cost us, at a minimum, $100 million. It has invited a federal investigation into our house and has exposed this company to a level of public ridicule and legal liability that is almost biblical in its scope. Henderson was shrinking in his chair. The 4 stripes on his uniform suddenly looked like a cheap costume. I was following procedure. He pleaded, his voice weak. No, the lawyer corrected him. You are abusing procedure to enforce your own personal prejudices. We have your file, Captain. We have the previous complaints. The pattern is clear, and you have made us complicit in it. The end game became brutally clear to Henderson. He wasn't here to consult. He was the scapegoat. He was the disease they were about to cut out. You're suspended effective immediately pending an internal investigation and a review by the FAA, Vance declared. You will surrender your company ID and be escorted from the building. Don't talk to the media. Don't talk to anyone. Meanwhile, finding O'Mara had become the FBI's top priority. But Agent Chen wasn't planning a raid. He understood the delicate nature of the situation. They weren't dealing with a hardened criminal. They were dealing with a brilliant wounded teenager who held all the cards. A heavy-handed approach could make things infinitely worse. She could have planted other logic bombs, dead man's switches, that could wipe their servers clean if she were apprehended. Chen did something unorthodox. He didn't try to trace her. He decided to talk to her. He found out about her foster mother, Elena, and approached her not as a federal agent, but as a concerned man looking for a missing girl. Elena, terrified after not hearing from O'Mara for 2 days, gave him what little she knew. Through back channels, Chen sent out a message into the digital ether he knew O'Mara would be monitoring. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. O'Mara, Washington. This is Agent David Chen with the FBI. We know what happened. No one is coming to arrest you. We need to talk. You have the power to fix this. Let's find a better way. O'Mara saw the message from her motel room. Her adrenaline had long since faded, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. The scale of the chaos she had unleashed was weighing on her. She knew she couldn't hide forever. Chen's message offered a thread of hope, a potential off-ramp from the destructive path she was on. She agreed to a meeting. Not at an FBI office, but on her terms. A public place. A small, neutral cafe in Queens. No uniforms, no handcuffs. The next day, O'Mara sat in a booth, a cup of untouched tea in front of her. Agent Chen walked in alone in civilian clothes and sat opposite her. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a tired dad. O'Mara, he began softly. You have a hell of a talent. You also have the undivided attention of some very powerful, very scared people. They took my future. O'Mara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. That pilot, he looked at me like I was nothing. I know, Chen said. And what you did, from a purely technical standpoint, it was remarkable. But you broke several federal laws. You've caused immense damage. They caused the damage first, she shot back. They just used different tools. I'm not here to argue that. Chen conceded. "I'm here to offer you a choice. Right now, you are in control. You can either be a cautionary tale, a brilliant hacker who ended up in a federal prison, or you can be the woman who forced one of America's biggest companies to confront its ugliness and change. Michael Vance and Ascend Air are terrified of you, and even more terrified of this story getting out. They are ready to make a deal." This was the twist Amara had never anticipated. She expected a manhunt, a trial, a prison sentence. She had never imagined a negotiation. For the first time since she stepped off that plane, she saw a path forward. Not just a path of survival, but one of victory. The power wasn't just in breaking the system anymore. It was in rewriting its rules. The executive boardroom at Ascend Air headquarters was a cathedral of corporate power. A vast mahogany table, polished to a mirror, shine reflected the Dallas skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was a room designed to intimidate, to remind any visitor of the sheer scale of the company's influence. But today the power was not emanating from the head of the table, where CEO Michael Vance sat flanked by a trio of stone-faced corporate lawyers. Instead, all the gravity in the room seemed to be centered on the 17-year-old girl sitting opposite them in a simple, borrowed blazer. Amara Washington was no longer the frightened, humiliated girl from the jet bridge. A quiet fire burned in her eyes, a focused intensity that the high-powered attorneys found deeply unsettling. She held a single sheet of paper, her posture straight, her resolve absolute. Agent David Chen sat beside her, a silent, watchful presence, his role not as her advocate, but as the mediator, and a constant, unspoken reminder of the federal charges that hung in the balance. "Let's begin," Amara said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the thick tension. "My terms are not negotiable." One of the lawyers, a man named Harrison, cleared his throat. "Miss Washington, we are prepared to offer a generous financial settlement." "I'm not interested in your money." Amara interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "I'm interested in accountability. That's the first term. Ascend Air will issue a formal public apology. It will be delivered by Mr. Vance, on camera at a press conference. In it, you will name Captain Robert Henderson, and you will state unequivocally that his decision to remove me from Flight 714 was an act of racial discrimination, a gross violation of your policies, and that the company failed to address his documented history of prejudice." Harrison started to speak, but Vance held up a hand, his face pale. He saw the trap. A private settlement would be easy. A public admission of racism was a brand killer. But Amara's digital bomb had already mortally wounded the brand. This was not a negotiation. It was a surrender. "Go on," Vance said hoarsely. "Second," Amara continued, "the termination of Captain Henderson's employment is not enough. Your company will forward its complete internal investigation, including all prior sealed complaints against him, to the Federal Aviation Administration. You will officially petition the FAA for the permanent and irrevocable revocation of his commercial pilot's license, citing his demonstrated endangerment of your company's operational integrity through his discriminatory conduct." She wanted him not just fired, she wanted him grounded, forever. "Third," she said, looking directly at Vance, "you stole an opportunity from me. You will restore it. Ascend Air will create a scholarship fund in my name to cover the full 4-year tuition and living expenses for any university I am accepted to. I will be attending Stanford to study computer science." "That can be arranged," Vance conceded quickly. It was the easiest pill to swallow. "I'm not finished," Amara said, her voice dropping, becoming more intense. "What happened to me happens to others every single day, in smaller ways that don't make the news. That ends now. You will establish a $20 million charitable foundation. It will be called The Amara Washington Initiative. Its sole purpose will be to provide scholarships, mentorship programs, and technology grants for students from underrepresented and minority communities pursuing careers in STEM. I will have a permanent, non-executive seat on its board to ensure it honors its mission. The lawyers shifted uncomfortably. $20 million was a staggering sum. But Vance did the grim math. The grounding had already cost them over $100 million. The stock plunge had vaporized $1 billion. $20 million to make the problem go away started to look like a bargain. And finally, Amara said, sliding the paper across the table, "Your systems are a mess, a liability. I got in through the front door. The next person might not be so specific in their goals. You will hire me under a 1-year contract as a lead cybersecurity consultant. My team and I'll choose. My own team will be given unrestricted access to rebuild your entire digital infrastructure. The contract will be for $1 million. The room fell into a stunned silence. She wasn't just demanding reparations. She was demanding the keys to the kingdom. She wanted to be paid a fortune to fix the very system she had so brilliantly broken. It was audacious, unbelievable, and from a business perspective, utterly logical. Who better to fix the flaws than the person who had exposed them all? Vance looked at Amara, truly looked at her for the first time. He saw past the teenager and saw the force of nature that had brought his empire to its knees. He felt a sliver of something that resembled admiration. He nodded slowly. "We agree." He said the words, sealing the fate of his company and the future of everyone involved. To all of it. For Robert Henderson, the fallout was not a negotiation. It was a public execution. He watched Michael Vance's press conference from the dingy sofa of his mortgaged home. He saw his own CEO, a man who had shaken his hand at company award ceremonies, look into the camera and brand him a racist, a liability, the sole cause of the company's humiliation. His phone lit up with calls from reporters and angry messages from former colleagues. Within an hour, he was a pariah. The FAA hearing was a formality. Presented with Ascend's meticulously documented file of his past and present conduct, they deliberated for less than an hour. The letter that arrived a week later was clinical and devastating. His license was revoked. The sky, his lifelong sanctuary and office, was now permanently closed to him. His 30 years of experience were rendered worthless. He tried to find other work, but his name was toxic. No airline would touch him. He was forced to sell his house to cover the mounting legal fees and the cost of the divorce his wife promptly filed. He eventually found a job at a dusty airfield in rural Arizona, working as a flight instructor for a meager hourly wage. His new reality was spent in the cramped cockpit of a single-engine Cessna, his voice hoarse from shouting over the sputtering engine at bored teenagers who dreamed of the life he had lost. His hard karma was this: every day he had to teach others how to fly, a bitter reminder that he himself was grounded for life. The cruelest cut came a year later, when a gleaming new Ascend Air jet flew overhead. Painted neatly near the cabin door was a small, elegant logo. He had to squint to see a stylized A and W. The Amara Washington Initiative. Her name a permanent scar on the flank of his former airline, haunting him from the heavens he could no longer reach. Amara's year as a consultant was a trial by fire. She walked into Ascend Air's IT department, not as a pariah, but as a legend. She assembled a small, brilliant team of young, hungry coders like herself. They worked relentlessly, not just patching holes, but tearing down the old, rotten infrastructure and building something new, secure and elegant in its place. She earned the respect of the veteran engineers, not with her reputation, but with her skill and her tireless work ethic. She used her salary to buy a small, comfortable house for her foster mother, Elena, ensuring she would never have to worry about money again. And she oversaw the launch of her foundation, meeting the first class of scholarship recipients, a group of bright, hopeful kids from neighborhoods like hers, their eyes shining with the same fire she had. In their faces, she saw the true meaning of her victory. She hadn't just settled a score, she had created a legacy. A year to the day after she was escorted off Flight 714, Amara Washington stood on the main stage at Innovatesphere. The spotlight was warm on her face. She wasn't a contestant in the crowd, she was the keynote speaker. Before her sat thousands of the brightest young minds in the country, the very people she had once so desperately wanted to join. She looked out at them, a confident, self-assured young woman on the cusp of her Stanford education. A year ago, she began, her voice ringing with clarity and strength. I was told I didn't belong on a plane that was supposed to bring me here. I was judged by a man who saw only his own prejudice, not my potential. He used the rules of a powerful system to ground me. So I used the rules of another system, a digital one, to ground him. But what I learned is that breaking things, whether it's a spirit or a system, is not the ultimate goal. The real power is in the rebuilding. The real victory is not in getting your seat back, but in building a whole new table and making sure there are seats for everyone. The story of Amara Washington and Captain Henderson is a powerful reminder that the systems we live in are only as strong as their weakest, most prejudiced parts. It's a tale of how one person's refusal to accept injustice, armed with an extraordinary skill, can trigger a revolution. Amara didn't just seek revenge, she sought restoration and systemic change, turning a moment of personal humiliation into a legacy of opportunity for countless others. Her story shows that karma isn't just about punishment, it's about balance. The scales were tipped by hate, and they were righted by brilliance. If this story of righteous justice and incredible karma resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell for more incredible true stories where the powerful are held accountable and the deserving find their ultimate victory. Thank you for listening.